Hello and welcome to tonight's City Club of Boise evening conversation with Justice Jim Jones. I'm Jen Schneider, City Club of Boise board member and tonight's moderator. This program is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, and the audio will be provided to our media partner, Boise State Public Radio. City Club of Boise brings people together to explore community issues and hear diverse viewpoints by creating spaces where conversations happen. This is possible through the support of our members and sponsors, and for this, we say thank you. Our premier sponsor is Northwest Nazarene University and the NNU College of Business. Our annual sponsor is the University of Idaho. We also receive support from our Forum Series sponsors, AARP Idaho, Bank of Idaho, Echelon Group, Micron, Optum Idaho, Pacific Source Health Plans, and Small Mine Development. City Club of Boise receives grant funding from the Idaho Humanities Council. Thanks also to our media partners, which include Boise State Public Radio, the Idaho Statesman, and Idaho Public Television, and our university partners, Boise State and NNU. We would also like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people on which we are meeting today. The goal of this conversation tonight is to discuss the question, should Democrats and independents register as Republicans in order to influence the Republican primary in Idaho? Some of you may have attended another City Club event that we held last month, in which the speaker there, David Adler, argued that voters should not alter their primary registration. Tonight, Justice Jones is going to offer an alternative perspective. Please remember that evening conversations, unlike forums in particular, offer an opportunity for our guests to really spend some time responding to your questions. You can use the Q&A function of Zoom for if you're watching from home, or email your question to morgan@cityclubofboise.org and I'll get it. I will try to present every question, but I may group some of them together if they're similar, or make them more civil. Sometimes that has to happen too. And then we'll be calling on some of you in the room as well. Okay, let me introduce our speaker. Jim Jones served as Idaho Attorney General for 8 years from 1983 to 1991. After completion of his service as Attorney General, Jim maintained a private practice in Boise from 1991 until being elected to the Idaho Supreme Court in 2004. He was reelected in 2010 and elected to serve as Chief Justice on July 15th, 2015. In addition to his extensive legal background, he has been actively involved in the community, serving on numerous boards and committees in Idaho during his legal career. Still active, I bet you'll hear about some of that tonight. Jim served as an artillery officer in the US Army, including a tour in Vietnam. He was honorably discharged as a captain in 1969. Jim received a number of combat decorations, including the Bronze Star, Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. In addition, he received an Army Commendation Medal for his civic action work with an orphanage in Vietnam. Welcome, Justice Jones.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks, Jen. Well, I'm here on a very auspicious day, and it has a lot to do with the subject at hand. I've heard it called Tuesday, 2/22/22. It's also George Washington's birthday. George Washington was born 290 years ago. He was, of course, as you know, our first president. He wasn't really too keen about governmental power. People wanted him to stay around for even past the 8 years, and he says, nothing doing. But he did something that was really remarkable with the help of Alexander Hamilton. He wrote a farewell address that was delivered as he was leaving office. He didn't give it as an actual speech, it was just published. And in that farewell address, he told us something that was extremely important. And the crux of it is that political partisanship will be the death of this nation. I'd like to read just a short little sketch from his farewell address. And it was published September 19, 1796. He warned that political parties can, quote, become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. Unquote. Extreme partisanship, he cautioned, quote, kindles the animosity of one part against the other, foments occasionally riot and insurrection, unquote, and can bring about, quote, disorders and miseries, unquote, that, quote, gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, unquote. So he was saying that partisanship, extreme partisanship, can lead to insurrection and to autocracy. It's amazing that he was able, those many, many years ago, to predict what we are now facing as a nation. And a very good part of it is due to partisanship that has gotten out of control. And it's not just one party, it's both parties, but I think at the present time, it's the party that has the loudest voice, and that party is in control of Idaho. But in a one-party state, we still have a two-party ruling class, just like the old Southern Democrats and the Democrat Party in other parts of the country. There were two parts of the Democrat Party. We've got two parts of the Republican Party here in Idaho now. The part that is extremist, and it's a very sizable group, and the part that is responsible, which is lower key. They don't say a lot. They don't rise to the occasion too much. I think they've been shouted down by some of the people on the far right. And so it's quiet, but they do have almost co-equal power in the legislature. A lot of the things that the legislature does that get passed come out of the House with a very large margin, and some gets passed in the Senate, but some does not. It either ends up at a desk such as Patty Ann Lodge in the State Affairs Committee, or perhaps in the Judiciary Committee, and dies a quiet death. But don't kid yourself, there are a lot of fights going on behind the scenes, and it is a kind of partisanship. Well, you know, I grew up in the Republican Party. I started my career in voting, and I always took it very seriously. I started voting in the 1960s, and every time I voted, I would either go to the polling booth or I would send a letter to the county clerk down there in Jerome County, which was my home county, and tell them which ballot I wanted to vote. And I could pick from any ballot that was there that had candidates running on it. And I generally picked the Republican ballot. I did actually from Tay Ninh Province, Vietnam, and voted the Republican ballot that year, at least in the general election. If I had known that Richard Nixon had just sabotaged peace talks with the North Vietnamese days before the election. I probably would have chosen otherwise, but anyway, I supported him. I wasn't really keen with the bombing halt that occurred at the request of Hubert Humphrey. So, you know, what do you do? But anyway, it worked out really great. I had political ambitions ever since John Kennedy made his speech about don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It hit me like a bolt of lightning, and I switched from engineering to political science and decided I was going to do what all of the candidates did. John Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and LBJ had all served in the military. They'd all gotten law degree. They'd all been U.S. senators. And I thought the U.S. Senate is where I'm headed. And so I worked toward that for many years. I got my first taste of politics in 1968. George Hanson was the 2nd District Congressman. He was in trouble. He hadn't reported he'd taken a couple of corporate campaign contributions, and he was convicted, and he stood in front of Judge Taylor, I believe it was, and said, you know, I was just not aware of it. And the judge didn't give him a big sentence. He just said he was stupid instead of evil. But that hit the newspaper. Somebody brought up a story about it in early 1978. I'd worked for Senator Jordan. I said, what do you think about this? He says, there's no way you can beat him. He's got such a strong base there in the Republican Party. He can't be beat. Then he got some other bad publicity, and I threw my hat in the ring. Do you think I went out to talk to the Republicans only to see if I could get elected? I did what every other politician in the state has ever done. Quietly go over and talk to the Democrats and say, I'm going to be better than that guy. And I think I probably had a lot of Democrat support. And I said, you know, here's where I stand. At that time, a big issue was right to work. And I said, well, I'm for it. And they said, well, that's fine. You're better than the other guy. That happens. I guarantee you that even up until this very day, there are Republican politicians who go to see if they can get some Democrats to support them. So the concept is not new. I didn't win that election. I ran against him again 2 years later when he was over in Iran trying to work out the hostage deal with the Ayatollah. Didn't have any luck. I thought, he's going down this time. Well, it didn't work. There weren't enough Democrats to cross over. But anyway, that's the way it worked. But you know, it was a different time. It was a time where if you were out on the campaign trail, you made buddies of the people that were on the other side of the fence. I remember a car broke down in St. Anthony for the Fisherman's Parade. And Ralph Harding, who had run against Senator Jordan, and we had fisticuffs back then, back in 1966, but he got me a car, a nice Cadillac convertible, and people got along. When I went into office as Attorney General in 1983, John Evans, the governor, a Democrat, and myself, the Attorney General, a Republican, worked hand in glove to overturn a really bad water decision by the Idaho Supreme Court, the Swan Falls case, that almost gave the Snake River to Idaho Power Company. And we worked behind the scenes, we worked out front, and we were able to get something done. About half of the Republicans in the legislature were for us. About half of them were against us. Same with the Democrats. It was an issue that was not a partisan issue. It divided people in the cities and the counties about an equal number, and we got stuff done. And that occurred because every time you went into the polling booth, they said, which ticket do you want? And you'd said, I'll take this ticket or that ticket. You didn't have a situation where you were stuck with one party no matter what. Well, a lot of the Republicans didn't like that. A lot of them did. And it caused a gigantic schism in the party. About 2006, 2007, there were people that wanted to have the Republican Party be closed so that only the party faithful could make a selection of who was going to run. Well, maybe that wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have a one-party state. But we do have a one-party state. You can count the number of Democrats in the House and Senate on your hands. Well, pretty much. But, you know, it's a different time of our life in this dear state, and it's not a good one. And we have outside groups that come in to take advantage of the situation. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to name the Idaho Freedom Foundation or the John Birch Society. They run hand in hand. The top officials in the Freedom Foundation are also top officials in the John Birch Society, which is growing in strength in this state. I thought that they'd sort of gone by like the cuckoo bird after they got every kid in the state to have to go to the dentist and have their teeth filled because the communists were dropping fluoridation into the water and it was addling our brains. And so the dentists made a ton of money on that one. But I thought that's the end of the John Birch Society, but here they are coming again, and they're taking advantage of the fact that they can kind of control the Republican primary. And it doesn't take a whole lot, you know, in a lot of these primary contests, the turnout's pretty bad. A lot of people have lost faith that they can make a difference in the primary. And so you have the party faithful showing up, and they nominate these people to run in the general. Of course, once you get the nomination on the Republican side, in most parts of the state, you're the winner. Well, they proposed that in 2007, but there was a impediment in the way. Some of the Republicans brought suit claiming that that was not something that was allowable. But it went to court, and in 2011, our federal district judge here, I have a great deal of respect for Judge Windmill, but I think he made a very errant and improper decision in the case. In March of 2011, the judge ruled that the Republicans could indeed close their primary because they had a right under the Constitution of the United States of America to freely associate as a party, regardless of what the state of Idaho might think they ought to do as far as keeping an open primary. I think the judge was wrong, and I've written about that in one of my columns. There was a 2015 federal court ruling in Montana that upheld their open primary, said it wasn't a violation of the Constitution, and it was based on US Supreme Court precedent. We could have had the same thing here if it hadn't have been for the errant decision. Judge Windmill did say something that was important, though. He said the Republicans are entitled to close their primary. He says, but it would have the, quote, very real and immediate effect of producing more ideologically extreme candidates, unquote. And that's exactly what it did. In fact, it worked in spades. And we have been feeling the consequences of it for this last decade, because each year leading up to now, we have gotten more candidates who are more extreme. And, you know, you have like Kootenai County, which used to be kind of balanced between Republicans and Democrats. Republican candidates win that county by a landslide. Brent Reagan, who is a leading light in the Freedom Foundation and also a leading light in the John Burt Society, is the county chairman of the Republican Party there, and you don't get anywhere on a ticket unless you pay fealty to those organizations, and it is extremely unhealthy. Now, I have a lot of respect for David Adler, but I think he is dead wrong on this issue. I think that anybody who wants to should file a registration to vote in the Republican Party. And, you know, the Democrats may do that or they may not. I think it's the best thing for them to do, but I'm really more concerned about the other 35% of the total electorate here in the state. The 310,000 independents who are not registered with either the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. They greatly outweigh the number of Democrats in the state. I suspect a lot of the independents are like me. They got tired of their party. I left the Republican Party in 2002 when it became clear to me that there was nothing that was going to stop Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney from initiating a disastrous multi-trillion-dollar war of choice in Iraq. I thought, I cannot take this party anymore. So I've been an independent ever since. But when election time comes around, I register as a Republican. I vote in the Republican primary, unless there's a really big and important issue on the other ticket. You don't have to register over there. You can just get that ticket, but that's what I do. And then usually as soon as the election is over, I register or I unregister and I'm back in the independent column. But these people have absolutely no voice unless they follow the path that says, okay, I'm a citizen. The Idaho Supreme Court, in a case that I participated in, I was the head of what they call the Committee to Protect and Preserve the Idaho Constitution. We didn't like the initiative killing legislation that the legislature passed. And so I joined up with Reclaim Idaho, and we challenged that legislation and were successful in getting it declared unconstitutional. But in that decision, the Supreme Court said, voting is a fundamental right and the state cannot interfere with a person's right to vote. And I think that everybody should take that to the bank and say, okay, I'm a Democrat. I don't want to be left out. I'm in a one-party state. And just for the purposes of the election, I have to do it by March 11. If you're thinking about it, you won't be able to do it after March 11, but I should be able to go down and register in the Republican primary, vote in it, and then do whatever you want after that. So anyway, I've told you about some of the people that I think are doing wrong. I'm also in another organization called Take Back Idaho. Take Back Idaho thinks that everybody should be able to vote in the Republican Party if they wish. And we will be supporting candidates that will go up against what I call the crazies in the Republican primary. And, I'm not trying to denigrate them or anything, but I think that they support policies that are just inimical to the state of Idaho. We will be opposing Ron Nate from Madison County, supporting Britt Raybold, a young woman whose family has been involved in agriculture and water issues for years. She voted to override some concerns by some of the really right-wing people who didn't want support to go to hospital. She had a hospital over there that needed state aid and needed aid from the federal government to keep it open. Really good candidate. Down in my old home ground, Lori Likely, I think I'm kind of a shirt-tail relation. My deceased brother's wife was related to the Likely clan. She's very accomplished in education, agricultural issues. Who's running against her? A fellow named Eric Parker, who claims to be the founder of the real 3%er Idaho militia. Sometimes he has been referred to as the Bundy Ranch sniper. He's running against Lori. It's an important issue. We cannot afford to have people of that ilk in the legislature. I don't care what their ideological views are. These people, some of these people are dangerous. Jim Woodward from the 1st District, really good guy, former nuclear submariner, has got a business up in Sago. He's been attacked by the Freedom Foundation and the John Birchers. He's got a guy running against him who doesn't want the Department of Health and Welfare to be able to protect children, which I think is really wrong-headed. But those are the kind of people we're going to be supporting. And we're urging people to vote for the party of your choice. And if it takes crossing over, fine. Well, the people who want to keep control of the party apparatus understand what's going on. There's a bill called House Bill 439, which will put limitations on independents registering in the Republican primary. If you're an independent, 2 months before the primary, more than 2 months before the primary on March 11th, if you aren't registered as a Republican by that time, you cannot vote in the Republican primary. People need to get registered with their county clerk. Don't mess with the Secretary of State's office because their registration. I didn't mean to offend the Secretary of State. Okay. But their machinery is down until the 9th of March, I understand. So people have to go to their county clerk and say, I'd like to register, and so be it. But there is this effort to try to prevent people from registering to be able to vote in the Republican primary. It's interesting because our sister state, Wyoming, they've got the exact same thing going on over there. They're trying to keep Liz Cheney from being able to make it out of the Republican primary because a lot of people there have, in historic times, voted in whichever party they wish. They have to be registered for it. And they've got an identical bill over in Wyoming just to slam dunk Liz Cheney. And she's got, according to an article I just read out of the Hill News. She's got a reasonable chance of making it out of the primary, the way that the vote could be split amongst multiple candidates. Oh, okay, can do. So anyway, it is an effort to keep people from being able to exercise their franchise the way they want to. And I think, quite frankly, it's not in keeping with what our founding father would have wanted. I'll say. I'll just try to distance myself a little more. Okay. I was going to go into the viewpoint of the Republicans. You know, they say, well, we've got to have our primary just catering to Republicans, because if the Democrats come in, they'll vote for the weakest candidate, the one that will be easiest to run against in the general election. That's pure baloney. I've been around for a long time. I know that there is, every time people were talking about, well, we ought to have a closed primary here, the issue got brought up. And I've seen a lot of elections going across the state here, and I have rarely seen a mass crossover to get the least regarded or the worst candidate on the ticket on the Republican side. It just doesn't work that way. People want to vote for somebody that they think is the best, that will do the best job. And so I think the pushback you get from the Republicans is just simply untrue. On the Democrat side, people say, well, let the Republican Party take care of its own problems. They're the ones that started the problem, and they ought to be the ones to solve it. It ain't going to happen. These groups that are supporting the candidates that are the extremists are extremely well supplied with money. There is a ton of money that comes into this state to support the Freedom Foundation candidates. They've got a lot of their own money, but there's a tremendous amount coming in. And I don't think we can leave it up to a weakened party like the Democrats currently are to resolve the problem. You know, if you're saying, okay, how's that? Okay, we won't be able to rebuild our party unless we can have our candidates running, and we don't want people to look at the voting outcomes and look at the thing that says, well, there's 200,000 or so Democrats in the state and 300,000 or so independents, and I think it's 400,000 or so Republicans. That's demoralizing. Well, you know, I think that's a matter of, that's where we are. And, you know, the Democrats that say, well, let's let the Republicans solve their problem on their own, are kind of like the people that are, you know, were rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as it was going down. You know, it ain't going to work. So the idea that the Republicans are going to solve their problem is just fantasy. It ain't going to happen. And we've got to do something. I mean, look at the kind of bills that are making their way through the legislature. We've got this militia bill. that, some people say it's not going to make a lot of difference, but I think it sends out a signal that Idaho is friendly, family friendly toward the militia crowd. There's a bill floating around that will get Dr. Cole, who prescribes ivermectin, and his clients don't have a lot of worms, but doesn't mean they're not going to get COVID. But ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, I'm sort of familiar with chloroquine. It was what they gave us in Vietnam to combat malaria. It didn't work. It was aimed at the wrong kind of malaria. There's several apparently different kinds, but it didn't work then. It certainly doesn't work now for anything, but they want to disable the medical board from implementing disciplinary action against people who are essentially allowing their fellow Idahoans to die with bum medical advice. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that are at stake. We don't dare, in my estimation, say, well, let's let the Republicans take care of their party's own problems, because it simply ain't going to happen. But getting back to what I started with, if you are willing to put the fortunes of your party over and above the public good of your state or your nation, if partisan considerations are more important than public policy that serves the will of the people, then you're doing exactly what George Washington warned us against. If you're saying, well, the Democrats' chance of coming back into power will be lessened if we, ignore all of the havoc that is going on in the legislature, that's partisanship and self-defeating partisanship, just like you have, I think, on the Republican side. I think we ought to give our primary allegiance to our state and the good of our state and the future of our state and the future of our kids, and also do the same thing on the national level. Party be damned. I think we should be able to go out and vote for who we think is the best candidate, regardless of party or lack of party. And that's the only way we're going to get ourselves out of the dysfunctional situation that we're in at the present time. So I would take a bit of disagreement with David Adler. Still respect him, still think he's a really good guy, think he has a lot to offer, but I think he's on the wrong track with this issue. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So we have these ceiling mics. Hopefully it's going to pick up for folks who are at home. I'm going to start us off with a question, but all of you be thinking of some. And those of you who are listening via Zoom, please make sure to enter your questions into our Q&A function, or you can email morgan@cityclubofboise.org. Okay, I got it. Great. So I wonder, Justice Jones, it seems that something that's interesting about our political moment right now is that we are on both sides really voting against our opponents as opposed to for our candidates. And that there's seems to be something to what you're arguing that suggests that what's at stake is the future of Idaho, and that we must vote against extremism. Is that a fair summary of your argument?
Yes, Jen, I think that in this current poisonous atmosphere that we have, unfortunately, a lot of our efforts are going to have to be of a negative nature, voting against people. But on the other hand, the people that, like my organization, and my organization is not the only one. There are any number of organizations, a lot of which are traditionally Republican oriented, who are doing the same thing. We've got to be a little careful about how we coordinate and to what extent with those organizations, but there are a lot of people who have just said, you know, I've had it. I'm sorry that I can't support my party, but the dysfunction is just too great. But on the other hand, you know, if you look at the candidates who deserve to be supported, like Jim Woodward, you know, he's doing a great job, but his opponent has drawn a lot more money than he has, and he's up in the 1st district, and it's a poisonous atmosphere up there. Linda Hartgen from Twin Falls, just an outstanding candidate. She was in the House, or is now, and is running for the Senate. She was the trial court administrator down in the 5th Judicial District, did a wonderful job. We worked with her on the court, you know, very closely, and she has, I think, gotten a good track record. And so, you know, you don't want to run against somebody who's really, you know, bad legislator. By replacing them with a bad legislator, we're trying to pick and choose, and I know other organizations are, to pick somebody and support somebody that will add something. The biggest issue that we're facing in this state is our support for public schools. And we are looking at candidates who will, instead of denigrating public schools and underfunding them and criticizing them and claiming that they're teaching critical race theory, the people who are making those allegations can't even define what critical race theory is, as evidenced by a bill that they passed in the legislature last year. They said essentially that critical race theory is critical race theory. That was the long and the short of their definition. And they can't find it. They don't know where it exists. Janice McGeehan and Priscilla Giddings hunted for it. They're, at least Giddings is really an accomplished hunter, good with a gun. She was out searching around for critical race theory, and they were not able to find it, kind of like Bigfoot. And so for each candidate that a lot of organizations are opposing, they're asking for that candidate to be replaced by somebody with a strong background in education and business, agriculture, people who will stand up for the public schools. I'll guarantee you this. We are in a situation where if somebody, and I don't know if I would be the one to do it, but somebody is going to bring a suit against the legislature claiming that they're violating their constitutional responsibility to adequately fund a public school system that is able to give a thorough education to our students. You know, here's the game plan that's been going on for the last decade. Underfund the schools, you get poor results, or not at least the kind of results you want, and then you point to that and say the public schools are failing. That's the game plan. And if that doesn't work, you say they're teaching critical race theory. They don't really care about the issue of critical race theory. What they want to do is to shake people's confidence in the public schools. What we're saying, and what our candidates will be saying, and what the candidates of some other organizations is, what do you do then when you close down the public school? every community out in the hinterlands, like my old Valley High School, community life revolved around what happened at the school, the football team, the school play, the dances. Our local schools are the heart and soul of every community. The Freedom Foundation's answer is, well, we can have private schools, and you say, well, you can't get to a private school from Howe, Idaho, or from Potlatch. And they say, well, they can go online. Well, okay, some of their benefactors, like the DeVos family, conveniently do have online schools for profit that would be happy to oblige. Well, the problem is that weren't we hearing that we don't want online schools? We want every kid to be in the classroom, whether they've got a mask on or not, preferably without a mask, because online schools don't work. But when it comes to advocating that we ought to have private schools, online schools are just fine. And we need to have candidates, and we do have candidates who understand that, who understand that you can't rip our education system apart and then expect our kids to be able to compete in the world. So we're looking at people that will do the job, that will get down to business like we used to have people do. They went up to Boise here. They met for just, 2 or 3 months. They knew they had a job to do, and they did it. They funded the schools. They were kind of stingy in a lot of respects, but they did it anyway. And, things worked well. I mean, we have an ability here in Idaho, if we put our mind to it, to get better results from lesser money. Okay, fine. But you can get to a point where you can't do what needs to be done with the education funding levels that we have. So that's a long answer to a short question.
It was a good answer. Thank you, Justice Jones. All right, let's take a question from the room and then we'll go back to Zoom. We'll go you and then you'll. No.
Justice Jones, I know candidates, Democrats, Republicans who are running for office are being counseled not to poke that wasp's nest of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. What would you say to a candidate, either party running now? Would you take them on?
Well, I think it has more to do with your district than anything else. There are some districts that, I would say just run it as best you can on your own. You'll notice that Chuck Winder has unabashedly said that the Freedom Foundation is killing the system in Idaho. And by the way, Channel 7, starting tomorrow night, and I don't know exactly the time, is going to have a 3-day series on the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I will be on there. Chuck Winder will be on there. And there are candidates like Jim Woodward up in Bonner County. He's taken them on. Sean Keogh, who represented that district also, the furthest north, took them on, and she beat him several times. But I think it took a lot out of her, and she's down here on some kind of a government job. Brett Raybould will take them on, but there are some districts where it should probably be left to other mean individuals, like perhaps me. But, I don't like to be mean to them, but, I think you have to call them out because they have had a free field for so long. And like I say, it's not just my organization, but a lot of others that have said enough is enough. And, I think candidates will get some cover from the organizations, but I think if your bent is to go out and just be positive, I would do that. I think that's a nice change for a lot of people. But it's just, who the voters are where you're at.
Justice Jones, we have one Zoom question and then we'll come back to the room. So people online want to hear more about Take Back Idaho.
Well, Take Back Idaho was formed about 6 months ago. Bruce Newcomb, who you know is the former Speaker of the House, Bruce and I have a long history. When I was fighting the power company back in 1983, Bruce called me up. He was just a private citizen down in Cassia County. His father and uncle had been involved in bringing sprinkler irrigation to Idaho. He was really interested in the water issue, and he says, "What can I do to help?" And so come 1984, the legislature had come to a standoff on the issue of whether they were going to solve the Swan Falls water rights fight. The power company's forces had about 50% and we had 50%, and we heard that the power company was going to try to take out some of our legislators. So Bruce and I got together and he formed a PAC, and we decided we were going to go all in against the legislators who had been supporting Idaho Power Company. And we managed to get 2 of them knocked off in the Magic Valley. We made a sweep of the legislators in eastern Idaho, and we knocked off one of the power company legislators in Ada County. Power company decided they were going to work to get the thing resolved, and we made a very good settlement, which resulted in the Snake River Basin adjudication, new water rules for the state. It was really a marvelous event. Bruce and I want to do that again.
Yes.
And our effort is going to be to go after some people and get them replaced by good people. Our president is Jennifer Ellis. She's a Blackfoot rancher. She has served as president of the Idaho Cattle Association. She's a longtime conservative Republican. She's on what they call the Committee of 9 in Water District 1, which is very influential in developing water policy in that part of the state and actually throughout the state. Ben Yasursa, the former Secretary of State, Jerry Evans, the former Superintendent of Public Instruction, Lydia Justice Edwards, one of my favorite people, the former State Treasurer. We've got a SCAD of office holders. We've got 3 former school superintendents, Don Coberly from Boise School District, Will Overgard from Washington County, and Jeff Thomas, who's the former superintendent over in Madison County. Rich Wills, who was in the state police. I first met Rich when I was Attorney General. Really good guy. I was driving under the underpass at King Hill on the interstate, and Rich invited me to stop a minute and discuss my speed. And I found him to be a really engaging person. His son, I believe, is currently the superintendent of the state police. But he served in the legislature, really good guy. Leon Smith from Twin Falls, just a wide range of individuals who have decided, that the Republican Party that they were part of got up and left them behind, and they want to take it back. And that's why, the Freedom Foundation to say, well, where are we going to take this party back to? And what we want to take it back, we don't want to take it back to anything. We want to take it back from them and from the redoubters who have come in to set up, a white-only Nirvana up in North Idaho. And we've got our website. Just Google Take Back Idaho. We've got a lot of issue statements on there about what we're up to, what we're supporting, and so on and so forth. We've started fundraising and doing pretty good. We can always do better. But I think that we are going to make a difference along with the other organizations who are involved in this process. And I'm quite optimistic that we are going to see some change in the legislature. I don't think you can expect that it's going to be overnight, but if some of the leaders of the disruptive folks get knocked off, the other people are going to see it and take a lesson from it. And I hear a lot of legislators who essentially vote for stuff they really don't want to, because they've got a lot of loud people in their jurisdictions that get in touch with them. I'll give you an example. Lori Likely voted to accept the $6 million from the federal government for early childhood education, which would have helped women to, get childcare so that the kids are getting educated and they could maybe take off and get a job. Anyway, she voted for that, and it was a close vote. Last week, I think it was, the Idaho Freedom Action, which operates out of the same office as Idaho Freedom Foundation with the same personnel, but they claim they're separate. Anyway, they sent out a hit piece to 80,000 people across the state saying that Lori Likely and all of her friends who supported that $6 million grant that just disappeared into thin air were socialists and communists and all kinds of stuff like that. It was pathetic. But, that's the kind of hit piece you're getting from that side. And so, sometimes you have to give them return fire and kind of let the candidates run on their own, But, that way the candidates don't have to get in the mudslinging. And if there has to be somebody that stands up and says that's wrong and you're not telling the truth, then that's our job.
Thank you. We have a question in the room.
Okay, my question, Justice Jones, is to the immediate concern about voting rights in this state. And the bill that you just referred to that passed in the House that will now go to the Senate that restricts the time you can transfer and some other related election things. In the past, there's always been some cooler heads that prevailed in the Senate side. Is this bill going to go to a committee where it'll get stopped?
Well, the Senate Majority Leader,
Right.
I think, may take a dim view of it.
Okay.
And make sure it gets to a committee where it's not going to go. The funny thing is that I think 3 weeks ago, Representative Troy, who was an initial sponsor of that bill, said that she was going to pull it.
Yeah.
And she said the bill was dead. And all of a sudden it was resuscitated back to life. And I think by people who wanted to try to fix the game. And so It was passed on a really close vote yesterday on George, or I guess it was before George Washington's birthday, but it was on President's Day. A nice little tribute to our presidents. But it was on a really close vote. And so I'm suspecting it's going to be sandbagged in the House. And, you know, there are a lot of maybe statewide offices that would be adversely affected. I don't want to point to any one of them, but I've let them know that if that bill passes, their chances perhaps of bringing some reason to the situation might be hampered. So we'll see.
Justice Jones, I have an online question, then we'll come back to the room. So you're advocating that independents and maybe even Democrats consider registering as Republicans for the primary. Where should those folks go for informed information about the Republican candidates?
Well, I know there will be organizations like mine who will be putting out information. It's a little premature right now because we don't know who all is going to end up, signing up for those various races. But the ones where we do have candidates who have stepped forward and said, yeah, I'm definitely running. We're starting, and I know some other organizations are starting to do the pro and con information. There are places where people can get that information, and it will be coming out too in the newspapers later on. I think the main thing is to get registered, and then you'll see what starts to come out. But I think we will have stuff on our website. The Conservation Voters of Idaho have taken an active role in vetting candidates, and I think they have probably some information. Idaho 97, I believe, is gathering up information. And I think some of the business groups are also going to have information that you might find on their website. And so I think as the election comes closer and we know who the field is going to be, March 11 is the last day to file. It's also the last day for Democrats to register in the Republican primary. And if this legislation passes, it will be the last day for independents too. But I put out a column today, and it'll be, I think, in the Idaho Press next Sunday. But I said, just to play it safe, if you're going to register, do it before March 11th. So I think there will be places where people can get information, and we're going to do as much as we can to get the information out on particularly some of the most dysfunctional candidates and, the people who are, the good people who are running against them. And we're not going to get involved in every race, but enough that, we can make a difference.
So I went to idahovotes.gov and switch over online and filled in the little dots, and it said I was switched over to Republican. Are you saying that doesn't work?
I think it may. I read an article in the paper the other day that said that the attorney or the Secretary of State was going to be doing something with their system, and it would be inaccessible until the 9th of March, but you may have got in ahead of time.
I did it probably 4 days ago, and I mean, it
If
came up on the screen, it looked like it took the data.
Yeah, if it gave you a positive message back, you're probably all right. I didn't understand why they would be doing this at this critical time. I mean, it just didn't make any sense, and maybe they've changed their mind. I think it was probably, when I read the news story, I thought that's the stupidest thing I've heard of. But they may have decided that they're not going to proceed with that. And it could be that some of the candidates, who are running, well, I probably shouldn't plug my Secretary of State candidate. I've worked with this young man who happens to be the Ada County clerk. I will not mention names.
But his initials are.
When I ran against George Hanson, his grandpa was the bookkeeper for the livestock auction company in Idaho Falls. Great supporter, a good friend of my dad who was in the cattle feeding business. And then I did some work for his dad, who had been employed by St. Alphonsus. And then I worked with him for many years in his role as the elections officer and county clerk, because we worked with him in the context of the court's work. So that unnamed candidate may have had some input with the Secretary of State's office and said, that's pretty stupid. Yes.
Are your candidates going to be running on the Republican ticket? And then depending on your answer, I have a follow-up.
Yes, all of our candidates will be in the Republican primary.
So if they get beaten, will you encourage them to run as a write-in?
No, we're just going to be focusing on the primary. A lot of us may decide we want to support somebody else in the general election. We don't want to get involved in that. We just want to try to get more balance in the Republican Party. So that's, and quite frankly, there are some independents like myself, a few Democrats, I think, mostly former Republicans or present Republicans. And I think we want to just get some balance into that party so that it gets back to its roots, where you have differences with the Democrats, but you work with them when you can. It's not such a divided politics like we have now. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And I think, we've got people across the spectrum, but we all think that that's the right thing to do, the thing that will be most effective.
Justice Jones, we have another online question, and I think you spoke to this a little bit in your opening comments, but the question essentially is, could you talk more about the argument for registering as an independent in Idaho? If what you say is true, that we're a one-party state, why not affiliate and just influence all the way through? Why register as an independent at all?
Well, actually, you don't register as an independent. You're what they call unaffiliated. So you have to make an affirmative act to either join the Democrat ranks or to join the Republican ranks. So, but the thing is, if you're unaffiliated, the only thing you can do is go fishing on election day or vote in the Democrat primary, or you can vote for judges and nobody knows who they are anyway. In my estimation, it is extremely stupid to have judges come up during the primary election because nobody knows who they are. The press doesn't do a very good job of telling people who they are and what their record is. Every time there was a judicial election, everybody in my neighborhood came down to the house and said, who's running? Are these people any good? But that's the only people that independents or unaffiliated voters can vote for is either judges or they can take the Democrat ticket, but there's usually, except in rare cases, I think last time around, there were a couple of Democrats running for the gubernatorial position. But for the most part, there's not enough Democrats to scratch up two to run against each other. So essentially, your vote doesn't even count unless you can go where the action is, and the action's in the Republican side.
Other question in the room? Oh, in fact, yep.
Sorry, me again. Is it, what's the chance of that, or the possibility that you and people with your like-mindedness would like become part of the party machinery and change who they're courting for public office?
Well, as for myself, at 80 years old, which I will be in May, I don't think I've got a lot of time left to contemplate that question. I like to be an independent. I grew accustomed to it when I was on the court. It fit me. It was what I wanted. I think probably people like Ben Sursa and Bruce Newcomb would like to be part of a Republican Party that is responsible and reasonable like it was back in their time. So I think people will probably, choose their own path. I may decide that I don't have to spew all of my thoughts out in the press. By the way, I also do a column for the Hill newspaper in Washington. I had one in the paper yesterday. I do one every other month, every other week. So 13 days down the road, I've got to dream up something and send it back to them. Yes.
I'd like to broaden the discussion a little bit, if I may. A number of us are concerned, as you are, about the influence the Idaho Freedom Foundation is having. Yet it's clear they've been very successful, and they have tremendous amount of influence. It seems that they've tapped into a dissatisfaction among a large number of Idaho electors. And I wonder if you got a sense for what that dissatisfaction is.
Well, I think a lot of it is stirred up by Fox News. A lot of things get brought up as issues that really aren't issues, like the critical race theory. I think that was dreamed up as a way to counter Black Lives Matter. But there are so many things that are dredged up as issues that really don't have any day-to-day value to the average voter. And I think it's something that developed in the last 4 years, where issues were brought up just to distract and cause confusion. And kind of like George Washington said, to get people riled up and dismayed so that maybe they would decide that some leader would be the answer that would take care of all their problems. I think the pandemic has helped to stir up disaffection also. I think if voters can be brought back to thinking about, the important thing is to make a decent living, to have their kids educated, and we don't need all this peripheral stuff that distracts us from those really important issues. I think perhaps we'll get to somewhat of a better place in our politics. But there is just a lot of dissatisfaction. I think a lot of it is because we're having a changing electorate and, we have a lot of people from south of the border who end up getting citizenship and are voting, and quite frankly, people of color who have not had a lot of reason to get out and vote are seeing that this is something that's working, and there's a lot of people that fear that. A lot of these people that are coming in from California, former law enforcement people from Southern California, moving to the redoubt in North Idaho, I think they're coming because they see it as some sort of a last stand. And there's a lot of concern and upset, and I don't know how you address that. I mean, but I think that there are reasonable people who were, who've been citizens of the state for a long time and don't recognize the state, just like Ben Sursa and some of the other people that are supporting our group. I think we can maybe show them that there's a better way. I'm hoping we can. Okay.
One last question for Justice Jones? Thank you so much. We really appreciated your comments today.
Oh, sure enough.